I actually haven't read your chapter yet, so I'm excited to see the twists and turns. That's always the best part, it's never what you expect, so that's exciting. So, what did you write about? Give us a little bit of a teaser.
Well, I wrote about two session stories because I'm a QHHT level three practitioner. So there's two. I mean, even the first one that I wrote about was, well, probably about 6 or 7 years ago, but it's stuck in my memory. Not many do, but this one has. And so I thought it was great that I actually have a parking space for this story now. So, but it went through, I did this session while I was doing some of the research into the between death and life phase. And so I actually got to see the continuity between coming into a past life and then what happened there and then journeying up and the planning and how that came back in and then it talked about karma and it talked about time on the other side. Like it had so much going for it. And it was one of those ones where I got a lot of really detailed information about the architecture and there was a military uniform. And whenever I get those, I try to get as much detail as possible and then go back and try to find where this time and place was. And the first story, I was actually able to. I wish I had more space in the chapter to be able to go back through all the research, but I'm fairly certain it would have been set in probably Wasserburg in Bavarian Germany in 1634. And there's all sorts of parts in there that you can find why that is. It's from the description of we come into the story of a young boy who's in a monastery and the description of the monastery and the surrounds and why he ended up there because his parents died of plague and in this area and all through the story of what he sees from his limited experience through his eyes as a young boy. When he goes into the town, there's all this people are quite angry about what's happening. And when you go back and look at the time period when this may have been, it was during the 30-Year War in Austria, and the local peasants and farmers were having a lot of trouble with the military coming through and taking all the food as they did and all that sort of thing. So there's so many bits and pieces that correlated with that. Although my client, when she was talking about it, was talking about the king, and it was actually a duchy then, but a young boy probably didn't know the difference fairly much anyway. So, and sometimes you get a little bit of the interference of the vocabulary of the client coming through. So there's a little of that, but there was more that you could track down than not. And so it was really interesting. This has been one of those ones that I was hoping I was able to share somewhere at some point. So, but yeah, it talks about the karma of what happened through that life and into the next life and planning phases. And it also, one of the things I've been really fascinated about is trying to find out when the soul actually enters the baby's body before birth. And in this one, on both of them, it was quite late. But I've had what I've been able to determine, it's very variable. So sometimes it's back when there's the first heartbeat or the limbs are still forming and, they can see sort of the orange and they can hear the voices around. And so, yeah, so it had a little element of that. And it was really interesting. And it's probably about the only session I can remember where the soul was actually interested in what happened to the body. Because normally when they pass, they're in the body and then suddenly they're right next to the body and they're looking down at it with quite a bit of detachment. It's like, oh, I didn't realize I looked that bad. Uh, but this one, the boy in the story was actually interested in what would happen to his body. So he followed it. And I've never had that before. And so had so many interesting elements in this one. And then I had a second one, which was kind of related, which was also showed the planning phase. But I had a client that was interested in that, what happened in the planning phase, between death and rebirth. And so, but it also is correlated with the first story in the aspect of time and how time is so different on the other side to how we experience it here. But it was actually quite funny. I mean, sometimes you get guides and clients where this part of them that comes through, it was quite a funny session. So, but yeah, it just kind of flowed between the two. So it shows sort of two aspects. There's quite a lot of detailed information, but I love these two stories. I'm glad I had a chance to share them.
Wow, that is so fascinating. I very much enjoy reading um, past life kind of stories where you can go back in time and research about the life of that person. There aren't that many out there. There's a few videos that I've watched where people could kind of track who they were based on history and, some things that correlate. So that's very interesting to me, very exciting. But I had a question. And I've always wondered about this. So when you do a QHHT and you are regressing this person and they go into sharing about another time, let's say in this case, for example, that you were talking about the German, um, does the personality of that person come through? Does that child's personality come through and then you ask that person questions?
Yes, yeah, it becomes a person and depends on how much of a somnambulist the client is. Like, not everybody is a full somnambulance in my experience, but you get some that are. And I can actually tell when I've got one because when I go through the induction, their face shape changes. Because, we're all energy. So they take on the energy, like they completely become that other person. And if you talk to them about things in this day and age, they don't know what you're talking about. But I've actually seen their face shape change. I had one where I remember I think she was from South America or something. So she had kind of darker skin. So when we're going through the past life, I couldn't ask them, look at your hands, what's your skin color? She said she was darker. But what I noticed was like when she was going under, her face shape changed into a very jowly African American. You know how some of those ones in the South, they get quite a rounded face. And so I saw that happening. And so when she came out afterwards, I asked her, were you African American in that life? She goes, yes, she was. And so you'll often see that, or I'll see them moving into, if they're female, they might move into male face shape. But I also see this sometimes when the higher consciousness comes through, that the face shape changes, because this is, as Dolores says, just a costume. And so when you're talking to the person's higher consciousness, which is like the eternal soul, it can change when it comes through as well, just subtly. I mean, my room becomes quite dim when I do this, but you can clearly see that that's the case. But yeah, so it's really interesting.
Yes, that's so interesting and so
And I love the fact you
fascinating.
never know what you're going to get, ever.
Yes. Yeah, because when you begin the session with someone, they don't choose where they're gonna go. It just random.
The
Well,
high
not
consciousness
random, but
chooses it.
yes.
Yeah, the high conscious completely runs the show. I'm just the facilitator. So it will show the client or have them experience whatever past life is most relevant for the issues they're having now. So most of the lives you get are very, what Dolores called digging potatoes lives. They're very ordinary people. And so, like you were saying, being able to go back and find that person can be very tricky, because back in the day there weren't good records about people or places, but there's really good records on military uniforms, and architecture can often give you a pretty good idea of the time frame. But like you're saying, it was funny how to find the actual person. There was one client that died in such a specific way in the 70s. I was actually able to find that person. And it was interesting. Like, obviously I can't say much about that, I don't have permission to share it, but it was in a very unique way that gets a lot of media attention. And so I was able to actually find information on the person, that they were in that life, what they were like, which correlated to what the client was saying their life was like then. And also just correlating between how they said they passed and what actually passed. I actually found a portrait photo of the person in the other life, and although they were born on completely different continents in this lifetime, and had completely different colouring because of that, their eyes were identical. So when they say the eyes are the windows to the soul, it is absolutely true. It blew me away, the fact that the eyes was just identical. So it was so cool. I love that sort of thing.
That is fascinating. So I wonder, let's say there's a version of me in the future, right? Sorry, I know there's a bit of noise. They're cutting the grass outside my window. So let's say down the line in the future, someone is regressing me, right? So they would regress that person in the future, and this is the life that they are finding, right? When the session is happening, So when that person is regressed and my personality in this life is coming through, what would I experience now here? You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. I don't know the answer to that question. Like, are you basically asking, are we aware when someone is
Yes.
tapping into this life here? I don't know
Yes.
the answer to that question. That is a fascinating thought. I
Yes. Because
wonder, but also, what you're saying, how in the future. So I was saying about time. Lineal time only happens here on Earth.
yeah.
When you get up into those other realms, all time exists at once. So you
Right.
are currently simultaneously living that future life from our perspective now, because
Right.
there is no time.
Right.
I
So
mean, when you
so
start to get into these, it blows your mind.
yeah, so that's because let's say the regression is happening and I'm being called through in that lifetime to help that person, deal with whatever issue they're having. What would I be doing in my current life that I'm aware in now while that's going on? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, would I
Well,
be,
what they would show you, and sort of looking backward engineering that from my perspective, what they would show you were the important life events
mm,
which would be impacting that future life.
mm, mm,
And
mm,
so what we do in the regression, that they bring you down into a life, and then we sort of embed you in there and we get you immersed in it and have a look at the circumstance, find out as much about you as possible. And then we'll move you through 3 important days in that life to try to
mm,
get why that life is important for you now.
mhm,
And
mhm.
this is where the therapy part of QHHT comes in, because by doing that, the high conscious will often show you things that events on those important days are impacting your life now. So
Right.
that's how. So I suppose from the perspective of the future, you would be like watching a video movie of what you're experiencing now. Whether you would be aware of it now, I don't know.
Yeah, because it was fascinating. You said you were interacting with that person. You said, look at your skin color and what color are you? And I wonder, would it be equivalent to me just having a conversation in my mind and looking at my skin and being, oh, that's an interesting color. And I'm kind of like a brownish caramel. I don't know. Like what would, and then for me, it's just a daydream. It's just, thinking or kind of like daydreaming. But for you, you're actually having a QHHT session with this version of me. You know what I'm saying? Or would I be
Mm.
aware? And would I be like, oh, I feel like something's happening. There's a consciousness that's speaking to me. I'm going to interact. Maybe it depends on level of awareness. I don't know.
It's possible. I'm thinking back to, like, I would know the answer to that question, but I was thinking back to some of the Dolores books that I've read, like Horns of the Goddess, where she goes back and talks to the same person each time, and Dolores becomes a bit like a voice in the head to that person. So
Oh,
that's possible. That
yeah,
is possible, yeah,
that
because
makes
she'd go
sense.
back to, and she's like, we were talking about this last time. Oh, yes, I remember, blah, blah. And what are you? And trying to find out, what this voice was that was coming to her and stuff like that. So, yeah, it's possible.
That makes
Fascinating
sense
question.
because sometimes, and I spoke to someone else who also has the same thing, and it happens to me from time to time too. And I sometimes assume that it's, higher self or whatever, but I'll have these random check-in moments like, hey, how are you doing? Is everything okay on your end? Like, um, like what's going on right now that you need help with in terms of to think something through. Maybe there's a decision coming up that I need to kind of think it through, or analyze the different options and how it will play out in different ways depending on what I decide or don't decide. And I thought everyone does this. I thought everyone has these random check-in moments with their self where they go through decision-making processes and things, and not everyone does. But I met someone who does, and she's like, I do the same thing. And I also thought this is higher self, and we just, chit chat now and then, and cool, off we go. But maybe
Or
those are
perhaps,
actually,
or
yeah.
maybe it's just your future you in this lifetime. Checking back, I would like to have a little word with my past self about a few things. Might be on
Yeah.
a completely different trajectory at this point, but it's amazing. But then you've also got your guides, and that was one of the
Yes.
things in my chapter was this guide and how it would work with this. This was in the second story. Work with this individual even when helping her through the life. And I describe it a little bit like well, this guide was talking about the fact that he just puts situations in front of you, and then it's your free will choice which way you want to do. I always say it's like they're elegantly opening door number 1 while we're trying to smash down door number 3, you know. But it's a bit like, I use the analogy of a shopping trolley, which I use a lot. So it's a little bit like, you know, when you got one of those wonky shopping trolleys and you're trying to make it go where it needs to go, and you've got all this energy trying to make it go straight. The guides are like the way I do that. I just kind of tap it and let it roll around and spin a bit, and just it gets where it needs to get to, but it does it in its own way. And that's a bit like how guides do it from this story. So yeah, I feel sorry for my guides sometimes.
And the guides, they have a very important role as I'm learning in these different lifetimes and how they show up, because they are the same guides most of the time throughout the different lifetimes. And yesterday, I was actually speaking to Ameera, and she was explaining a lifetime that she was regressing for someone, but it was not an Earth lifetime. It was a different lifetime, and it was on a different planet. And this person had a spontaneous kind of out of body projection type thing. And they found themselves in a closet looking through. And as she's peeking through the closet, she's watching this other being, you know, do her routine, like brushing her hair and whatever. And the guide shows up in the closet and says, "Oh, you cannot be here. We got to go." So it was so interesting for me how the guides show up when and where, because we have free will, right? We do our own thing. Sometimes we end up where we're not supposed to. Sometimes there's a little bit of the weird things going on. Not weird in the sense like it's wrong, but just now's not the time and place for you to be here, or this is not really relevant for your experience right now. Let's move on to something else. You know, the guidance is always there, which is interesting for me.
That was why this second story was so interesting, because we really got to see a guide's perspective, which doesn't often happen. And it was a bit like the guide didn't really mind which way, which selection that the client made in that next lifetime. Like it wasn't really, you could go this way, or you could go that way. Everything's fine. Obviously, the guide hoped you'd go that way, but if you go that way, you know, just do it again. So it was it was interesting to see it from the guide's perspective. And the guide was like, the poor thing. Even the client, she's getting up there, and in this one, she was a little bit, she's almost remembered what she was supposed to be doing, but she wasn't 100% there yet. And the guy was being very patient with her. And it was like, he says to her, something like, you know, what do you want to be in your next life? And she says, I want to be rich and I want to be famous. And he just kind of just, yeah, like we go through this every time. You know, do you really? It was funny. It was really quite amazing to see it from a guide's perspective, which we don't tend to do a lot in, or at least I haven't experienced a lot in QHHT. We're mainly talking to the higher consciousness, but in this one, she was interested in what the planning phase was, and the guide was involved with that. So, yeah.
Wow, I love that perspective too, the planning phase, right? Because again, it's fascinating to just live the lives, and it's fascinating to just connect with the different lives in one lifetime or multiple lifetimes, even, or even just tap into multiple timelines and explore what would have happened if you made even a different decision, for example, whatever, through those timelines. But then getting to the planning phase, you have to think a whole differently, because now when you're in the planning phase, there's no human attached. So there's no kind of like human interference in terms of like, you know, I like the rich and famous example. When you are in spirit and you are planning the life, you look for the lessons, or you look for the choices where you're going to learn the most and grow the most and expand the most, I assume. And that's not always, you know, the most rich and the most famous life. But when you're human, you're thinking, I don't want to suffer. I want to be rich so that I can solve all my problems with money or whatever, you know?
It's funny because when she got there, she thought, when he said, well, what do you want? She's like, oh, I can pick anything, you know? But then she realized after that, it was like, oh, no, it has to kind of be continued. Like there's a continuation between the two. There's a flow between the two. And so then she kind of got it. But it was just so funny how patient this guide was with her. And what was the other thing I was going to say? Oh, it's yeah. But, and in this one, and it also went through, you know, the life review. People talk about the life review, and she had the life review, and And she just felt so supported and held through that process, and nobody judged her. She just got to look at it and go, oh, well, perhaps I didn't do this bit really well. And so the guy was like, well, how about we just do a quick one? It's a bit like, we'll tick that box off. And so all of a sudden she's straight down into this other life of this little boy who didn't live very long, but he lived his life to the fullest. So what she didn't learn from the life before, she was able to quickly tick a box. Okay, let's plan a longer one after that. So it looked at all of that sort of thing, which was interesting. But at one point we're talking to the guide, and we were talking about the planning phase, and I got a bit curious, like, do you have an option other than to come back down here to Earth? Do you have an option to be born onto another planet or another dimension? And she goes, yeah, I do, but I like to go to Earth because you get the most growth. She said, because it's so messed up down here. That's why she liked to reincarnate on Earth, because it gave her the greatest growth. Well, it's interesting
Wow.
perspective.
That is amazing. So when she was experiencing the life review, was it a living life review in this current life? Let's just go through the checklist, or was it life review of the other lifetime where that person had already transitioned into through the death experience and then experienced that life review?
She'd gone through the past life, and she died, and then she went up through this phase to find this guide, and then they together reviewed. Like, the guy was kind of there, just there supporting. She felt very held through the process, and it wasn't like she was being judged. She just got to see. She made her own aha moments about the life,
Wow.
in that she hadn't. She didn't re-engage once she lost someone in that life. And before that, she could see it from the full perspective there. Before that, she was energized and living life. And then this particular event happened, and she never re-engaged. She says, oh, well, I probably didn't do that well. So that was that really short one that they then
Yes.
planned in between to really engage in a life. And so it was such a supportive type of process. And so
Yes.
that's one of the things we wanted to do in this book, is really to dispel people's fears about, about some of the things related to death. And I hope this kind of shows people that process is a really held and supported. There's nothing to fear. Nobody judges you. You judge yourself.
Yes.
Type of experience. So yeah, it was good that it gave, but it's just some of the things that
Yes.
the poor guide had to put up with. It's quite funny.
Yeah, but I
But
mean, they unconditional loving beings, they have, I would assume, unconditional and unending amounts of patience, and love for these situations.
yeah, and she even had the perspective, or the knowing, that this particular guide looked after a number of other souls or incarnation. And I was thinking the other day, it was like the fact that we are all having multiple experiences once. Maybe it's just this client having multiple experiences, and this is what this guide is helping. Like, it's
Yes.
not multiple souls he's helping, it's one soul having multiple experiences. I don't know. Didn't
Yeah,
ask that
that
question.
makes sense. And as you was explaining about the life review situation, so I always wondered, when I speak to people who've had NDEs and they talk about they were experiencing their life review, they'll usually have clarity about one or two beings that are with them. Right? Sometimes it's Jesus, sometimes it's a guide, sometimes there's an angel with them, usually it's Archangel Michael or whatever. And they'll have their life review with one or two beings that they definitively know this is who it is, but they are always, not always, but sometimes they are aware of a few others or one or two others that are around, but they don't really pay attention to it. There isn't really much going on there. Their interest and their attention is not there, but there may be sometimes one or two around. And I'm wondering, from what you've explained, if that could be this other life, past life, they're experiencing this life review with them in the background, kind of like, oh, this is my other life, and I'm watching them have the life review and this and that, like it could be. Who knows?
Who knows? That's the thing. Anything's possible.
Anything is
So,
possible.
yeah.
Fascinating.
So yeah, it was really, and it's funny how you mentioned Jesus. It's pretty rare for for Jesus to make an appearance in one of my QHHT sessions anyway. But in that first story with the boy, he did as well. So there was just so many elements in that one
Oh my
that
goodness.
it was so unusual. So yeah, but souls have such a different experience when they pass. I've now done hundreds and hundreds of these. These are just two that came back onto Earth, and there's been others that have gone into different realms and dimensions and planets. And I had one that people are going to think this is completely off the wall, but she a lot of her existence when she wasn't on Earth, she was on this planet, and they had all these different coloured pools, and she was like this fluffy round ball with little stick arms and legs, and she spent her existence just bobbing between the different pools and experiencing the energy in that, and that was her life. But that wouldn't have been a life with a lot of growth. That's why they say come down, do these difficult lives, and they learn and grow more. I suppose, I don't know, but yeah, and they don't always go up into source. Many of them do. Some of them go into space. Some of them go other places. So it's
Yeah,
completely
I mean,
varied.
it is like you say, anything is possible and it's endless and you can experience anything. And Jen actually in her chapter she explains how in one of the lifetimes she connected to, she was a diamond. She was a literal diamond, and she explains what that was like being a diamond. And she had a purpose, and her purpose was to give and receive messages. So she would be a messenger, and she would project these messages wherever they would need to go, and she would receive them and send them. And fascinating. And I'm thinking, wow, you can be a diamond and then you can be a little boy in Germany and then, you can be this little fluff ball bouncing around in pools and you could be a speck of dust just floating around outside.
I've had them be everything. I've had them be rocks. I've had them be water. I've had them be air. I had one that was shown what it was like to be a parking meter once. I think the high consciousness was just trying to prove a point on that one, but who knows? I've been very nice to my computer ever since, just in case it has full consciousness. But it's just like anything can happen. And it was just so fascinating when they get into be animals. I had a client that was a bee, and just how absolutely distraught it was when its brother bee got run over by a cart. Who knew they had that depth of
Yes.
emotion? It was just amazing. And then you got people who are flowers and they know they're not going to live very long, but they're just so happy. And people are trees. They love being trees. And they love, I've had ones that just love being there and just looking up at the stars at night. And they're all connected, like all of the trees. And they've proven this through, I saw a TED talk about somebody who did research into trees and its interconnectedness through the mycelium network. And in these sessions, it's like that one tree will know what's happening on the edge of the forest
Oh yeah.
because this communication network. So that's interesting. It's just, and
Yes.
there was one that was like a droplet of water on a blade of grass in the dew of the morning, and there were some horses around eating grass. Anyway, she was showing what it was like when the two little droplets came together, become a larger droplet, but they still had their own sovereign consciousness. And then at one
Whoa.
point they got yeah, and then they got eaten by one of the horses, and so then they're in the horse and they're part of the horse, but they've still got their own sovereign consciousness. It was so interesting.
That is
But
amazing.
the entire theme of her thing was sovereignty. So that this is why there's always a reason they show you. It's never random, even if it's not immediately apparent when you ask them later and you connect in with the client's higher consciousness and ask why they showed them that. It just blows your mind.
That is
Just the
amazing,
connection.
amazing. And it reminds me of a few years ago, I was doing this it's not really a retreat. It was kind of like this interactive exercise that workshop thing we did over a few days. And the teacher explained to us that, and it was just a kind of like an exercise in expanding your consciousness around your everyday environment, right? And so for 3 days, everything we interact with, we had to treat it as conscious because it was the way she explained it, right? So, like you said, be nice to your computer. So, before I would interact with my computer, I would thank it. Thank you. I love you. Before I wash my dish, Thank you. I love you. Not only to the dish, but to the dish sponge and to the detergent and to the water and to my tap and to my dish washing basin before I sat on my bed, to my bed and my bedding and my pillows. Everything you interact with and you come into contact with, thank it and offer love. And at first, the first few days, it takes a little bit of adjustment. It feels a little bit stupid. But on the third day, I felt like I was part of, I want to say, the dewdrop on that blade of grass in this meadow. I felt like I was part of everything, and I felt like everything was connected, and we were all supporting each other. And it was a togetherness. It wasn't me and these are my things. It was me part of this environment, and everyone has an equal role, and everyone is an equal component of what is going on here. No one is above or below, I don't know how it happened, but I just had that feeling inside me. It's not something I can explain to say like, oh, my pillow, my pillow is above me or equal to me. It was just this feeling. Um, so fascinating that I thought about that now as you were talking about that, because I didn't think of the thought process when that exercise was being put together.
Yeah, but also by doing that, what you're doing is sending out your own vibration of gratitude. And so that then alters your environment. It also increases your perception because you start to move from 3D to 5D thinking. So you become more aware of your environment. So yeah, but it's also, people think this is some sort of new type of concept. It's like this Australian Indigenous First Nations people have always known everything has consciousness. Like they've been ahead of the game on this for I don't know how long. I really wish that we could get access to and share more of their wisdom because they've understood quantum physics and all of this for at least 65 million years or however long they've been. So it's not a new concept, but it is an interesting concept. And then when you connect with it, then to be able to communicate with them, these other objects, and just see how your world changes. Can you ask it for things? Can you, that sort of, so just play around with it. It's fun.
That is wonderful. That is so exciting and so fascinating. And I cannot wait to read your chapter. I cannot wait for everyone else to read your chapter. And I'm encouraging everyone, if you haven't already, get your book on pre-order on ebook. It's only 99 cents. So get it for volume 1, 2, and 3. The price will be adjusted after the promotion, which ends on May 26th. So get it now. I'll put the link in the description. I'll also put a link to Lynda's website and where you can reach her in the description. If you are curious about QHHT and your own personal life experiences, and if you want to have a session or do a regression, contact Lynda. I'll put everything, the links in the description. And thank you so much, Lynda. I wish we had more time, but I'm very fascinated. I want to definitely learn more and read more. And I'm hoping that we can chat again sometime and dive into some of the other stories, maybe that you didn't share in your chapter, but are equally fascinating. I would love to hear more about those too.
I love to talk about it, obviously. So yeah, that would be wonderful. Thank you so much for this
Wonderful.
opportunity. It's been so much fun.
Yes, thank you, Lynda. I look forward to speaking to you soon. Have a wonderful, wonderful day. Chat soon.
You too.